So in chapter 4, we're going to look at the role of the nucleus. In looking at the function of the nucleus, we can remember from last year that the nucleus is the organelle that's responsible for heredity and for controlling the functions of the cell. It's also the control center of the cell. It's in charge of everything else that happens in the cell. The nucleus contains the master set of instructions that will determine what each cell will become, how it will function, when it will grow and divide, and when it will die. A trait is a particular feature that can vary in size or form from individual to individual within a species. Biological traits are inherited from biological parents. Take a few seconds and pause the recording and list 5 traits that you have inherited from your parents. Some examples of traits, and you may have mentioned these and you may not have, would be something like if you have hair on your fingers. Some people do and some people don't. Another trait that you may or may not have would be freckles. That's also something that you may or may not inherit from your parents. Some traits are considered to be dominant, which means that they have a more likely chance of being passed on to the offspring or to a child, and some traits are recessive, which means that they have less of a chance of being passed on to a child or an offspring. So for example, brown eyes are dominant and blue eyes are recessive. Heredity is the process through which patterns of traits are passed on from an individual to its offspring. Take a second, pause the recording, and jot down on the slide the answer to the following question. What do you think is the likelihood of a person having Huntington's disease if one of their parents had it? DNA, also known as deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA is found in the nucleus. It's a long, double-stranded molecule. It also forms what we call a helix structure. And if you think of a ladder, if you were to put your hand on the top of the ladder and the bottom of the ladder and twist it, that's what a helix structure would look like. Your DNA contains all of the instructions necessary for all life on Earth. And to show you what the DNA molecule would look like, this is what the helix structure looks like. It looks like a twisted ladder with the steps going up the ladder. Structure of the DNA. Well, the sides of the DNA ladder are made of sugar and phosphate. The steps are made up of 4 nitrogen bases, and those bases are adenine, which we use a capital A to represent, guanine, which we represent with a capital G, cytosine, which we represent with a capital C, and thymine, which we use a capital T. The 4 bases that I mentioned in the previous slide, these bases in a DNA molecule, they always join in a specific way. The A will always join with the T and vice versa, and the G will always join with the C. You will never see A and G together or A and C, and likewise you will never see T and G together or T and C. So because the A and the T have to be together and the G and the C have to be together, this is what we call Chargaff's rule. Take a second and consider the following question. Pause the recording so that you can give yourself a chance to answer it. What would one side of the DNA molecule read if the other side was A, T, C, C, G, G, A, T, A, C, G, C? So if those bases were on one side of the ladder, what would be the corresponding pairs on the other side? So just take a moment to pause the recording and see if you can figure out what they would be. So let's take a second to talk about chromosomes. DNA is found in a structure called a chromosome. When a cell is ready to divide, each strand of loosely coiled DNA will fold up further into a compact X-shaped structure called a chromosome. And you can see from the picture that a chromosome does indeed look like an X shape. Chromosomes within the nucleus are always found in pairs. Most humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, including one pair that determines gender. So that one pair will determine if the offspring will be a boy or a girl. So take a second and pause the recording and see if you can answer the following two questions. What is the total number of chromosomes in a human cell? And would you expect a butterfly to have more or less chromosomes than a human? So this diagram shows how many chromosomes a human would have versus a fruit fly, which the scientific name is Drosophila. So in a human, you can see that there are 23 chromosomes, and the 23rd is right here. If the 23rd, which is the gender chromosome, is X and Y, then the offspring will be a boy. But if it was XX, like you have down here below, then that would be a girl. And you can see from these two examples that not every organism has the same number of chromosomes. So while the human has 23, right here, the fruit fly has only 4. A gene. A gene is found on a chromosome. Small segments of DNA are located at specific places on the chromosome. The genes store the information that's needed to produce proteins that can be used by body cells. How many genes do you think would fit along a chromosome? Genes can vary in length from hundreds to thousands of bases. The arrangement of those bases will determine exactly which protein is produced. And each chromosome contains thousands of genes. The reason that the genes are important is because they help to make proteins. And proteins are important because they help to determine what body cells will become and how they will function. So you'll notice that the genes and the proteins that make different body cells form different things. So in our picture, you can see that you need different proteins to make cells in the retina, and the proteins that are used to make the cells in your stomach and the cells in your muscles are all made from different proteins, and those proteins come from the arrangement of genes on the chromosome. These specialized cells will then form tissues, and if you remember from last year, those tissues will then go on to form organs. That concludes the end of section 4.1, all about the nucleus, DNA, chromosomes, and genes. So take a second and answer the following questions on the slideshow. So numbers 1 to 3 on page 119, and then numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 12 on page 121.